You can win this one. You get the money. I want to bring in now Marc Thiessen, Washington Post columnist and Fox News contributor. Marc, great to see you. I have been reading a little bit about what you write because you are prolific. Why is it that you say, Marc, that this is even worse than what we have already seen reported about Biden's budget?
Well, first of all, $6 trillion would be the largest level of spending since World War II as a share of the economy. But then, as you pointed out, it doesn't include the $3 trillion from mandatory spending for Social Security and other things. But the other thing it doesn't include that's nowhere found in this budget, it's Biden's public option. During the campaign, he proposed $1.4 trillion plan to create a public option in healthcare. It was like the main thing that he campaigned on in terms of social spending. It's not in the budget. So we've got another $1.4 trillion coming for the public option. And if you look at his campaign pledges, he promised during the campaign $11 trillion in spending. This is only $6 trillion. So we've got another $5 trillion to come down the pike.
Okay, so you really are keeping score, because I think there might be a number of people who went, oh my gosh, okay, so he said 11, we're seeing 6, really 9 when you add in the $3 trillion that will go to Social Security and those other programs that they kind of have on the side right now. So did we scoot by with an extra 2? And what you're saying is, no, hang on, Katie, bar the door, there's more to come.
There's more to come. And then there's the tax side of this. So this plan right now would have, it's the largest spending since World War II. It's the largest tax collection as a share of the economy in a century, right? And so what does this plan include? It includes a middle-class tax increase, right? Remember, Joe Biden promised during the campaign, nobody making $400,000 a year or less is going to get a tax increase on his watch. But his budget assumes that he is going to let the Trump tax cuts expire, all of the tax cuts, including the middle-class tax cuts. Well, letting a tax cut expire is a tax increase. So he is going to raise taxes. So either two things are possible. Either his budget is a lie, and he's not going to raise those taxes, in which case all of his revenue projections are a lie, or he lied to the American people when he said he wasn't going to raise taxes on the middle class. You can't have it both ways.
But you can't have both of those things, unfortunately, in succession, right? I mean, you don't have to do them both on the same day, which is really what is troubling about what you're saying. Oh, you can't have it both ways. But you can have more bad news in succession. So talk to me about this, because when you say the middle class, people really don't always understand what that means. The ball keeps moving on who really falls in that. We're coming out of a situation where people have not been in the workforce. Some of them still aren't in it. What does that actually mean?
Well, so the Trump tax cuts gave a tax cut to 65% of the American people. So if you let all the Trump tax cuts expire, which is what his budget projects, then you will raise taxes on 65% of the American people. Now, there is a significant part of the population that doesn't pay taxes, and that's true. They probably won't get their taxes. They won't get their taxes increased. But anybody who got a tax cut under Donald Trump, if your taxes went down, 65% majority of the American people, you're going to get a tax increase. And I guarantee you, 65% of the country are not millionaires and billionaires.
Wow, I just wanted that number, that fresh number from you, because I know you've been writing about this so much, you're keeping up with it. 65% of the American people who pay taxes and got a tax break from the Trump era now will see a tax hike. And as you said, don't let them shine it up. That's really what it is. Okay, House lawmakers are set to introduce a new set of bills today that would establish a 9/11-style bipartisan commission to investigate how the coronavirus pandemic started, and would allow victims' families to sue China. All of it comes as a former State Department official now says a government probe last year did not back up widespread reports that the virus likely was originated in a wild animal market. Watch.
We were finding that despite the claims of our scientific community, there was almost no evidence that supported a natural zoonotic, evolution or source of COVID-19. The data disproportionately stacked up as we investigated that it was coming out of a lab or some supernatural source.
And Marc, you just wrote a fresh op-ed in the Washington Post ripping the media for largely dismissing the Wuhan lab theory, initially calling the press actions a shameful dereliction of duty. Why?
because they did it because basically it was Trump and Tom Cotton and conservatives who were saying these things. And back then, the Democratic playbook and their media allies was to blame Donald Trump for the pandemic. So any effort to cast blame on China was considered a distraction from the effort to blame Donald Trump. Well, okay, now Donald Trump is out of office, so can we finally blame China? Apparently now it's okay and it's safe to do so. And the reality is, of course, this came from the lab. There is zero evidence to show that it came naturally. Look at the evidence on the lab. Okay, so it happened in Wuhan, which just happens to be the home of China's premier lab studying bat coronaviruses. We know that in 2018. U.S. diplomats warned about lax safety practices. We know that the Wuhan lab was conducting dangerous gain-of-function experiments on bat coronavirus to make them more infectious for people. We know they were doing it at biosafety 2 levels, which is the level of safety at your dentist's office, instead of biosafety level 4, where you have the spacesuits and all the rest of it. Those are facts. We know that there's a long history of viruses escaping from Chinese labs. The SARS-1 virus escaped 4 times from the Beijing Institute of Virology, and we know that 3 lab workers at the Wuhan lab got sick with COVID-like symptoms in November, just as the pandemic was starting. You don't have to, as Bob Dylan said, you don't have to be a weatherman to know which way the wind blows.
Wow, so many details there. And we learned yesterday from 4-star General Jack Keane, who said that that situation that you just described early on outside that Wuhan lab was so disturbing that they put a general outside that lab. I mean, China was clearly interested and worried. We were clearly interested and worried, and should still be, from everything that you've just said. So it sounds like simply, did some powerful Democrats choose China over the former president and what finger pointing they were doing? Just real quickly, your thoughts on that.
Absolutely they did. And look, the reality is we need to get to the bottom of this because of the legislation you just mentioned, which would allow Americans to sue China. Right now, if this was naturally, if they can still point to this as an act of nature, then they can say we're not responsible, because who can control an act of nature? But if this came from a Chinese government lab that was because of lax safety practices and irresponsible research practices, then it's no longer an act of God, it's an act of state. And that means the Chinese government is responsible for the release of the pandemic that has killed 3 million people around the world, including 500,000 Americans, and they can be sued for their negligence and for their irresponsible behavior. So this is really important to get as much information as we can, pointing to this, to what is the obvious outcome, which is that this came from a lab.
Wow, it's called delayed accountability. Let's see if the American people can get any of it. Marc Thiessen, thank you very much.